first ship's coming out. Thank goodness they staggered. I'm hearing from scouts that there's a Perseus landing first. Perseus landing first. I need all harassment. Small ships get on this. Small ships get on this. Remember to keep your transversal up and keep moving.
Welcome to my first tier list of this game. I've gone through quasi-caps and cap ships in a fun way where I've categorized them into different sections, and I'm going to start with the Perseus, a wonderful quasi-cap, and it will help explain the different categories, as well as at the bottom of the page here that I have up on the screen explaining my my understandings of these. So, for starters, thank you to my long-term subscribers, by the way. I make this content as much for you as I do for myself. The offense of the Perseus is at an 8 because of its very, very reasonably sized turrets, and it has enough space for the ammunition to keep those turrets going, and it has the crew to support those turrets. And they're turrets. Even if they slew slowly, as in turn, slowly, they are still turrets, so they don't have to point the entire ship at a target. So they are very good at that. Additionally, its complement of smaller torpedoes are quite useful. To help it with ships that might be a little faster than its turrets, but still big enough to be hit by the torps. Kind of keep them on their toes until you run out of them. As for its defense, which is the next category, I gave it a 7. My attitude is that it has a limitation in smaller ships, and it should be very careful around ships like the Ares series or the Eclipse, which have large enough firepower, but they are, in theory, small enough, we'll see after Master Modes if that's still the case, to outrun or outslew the turrets if they keep transversal. Additionally, the next two categories, which kind of go hand in hand, are utility and ease of use. As you can see, the Perseus got a 2 for utility, because it has very limited fleet support capabilities and very little ability to kind of self-sustain itself, keep itself going, and you can see that that category basically lists fleet support and self-sufficiency. On the flip side of that, though, it has an extremely high ease-of-use category, and that's due to its small crew size and very limited unique skill requirements for its crew. Plain and simple, the crew gets in turrets that are larger than normal, and they shoot them, and that's basically the deal. So, on a ship like this, simplicity is in its elegance, and it has high maneuverability, at least based on what we've seen, for a quasi-capital, to get it into position to truly get it there. I will add one addendum to its maneuverability, in the sense that because the turrets slew so slowly, and they are the primary reason you will be taking this ship places, you do want to keep that in the back of your mind. This ship may be overkill, and it actually be a detriment to your duties if it's by itself, especially if the targets are medium size or smaller even. Once again, we have to see Master Modes, how truly they get slowed down when ships are in combat mode, but I have an inkling that that's how they're balancing this ship. That being said, if two of these ships were together, and I have not scored these ships in that way, but if these ships were together, there would be no way for the smaller ship to maintain a high transversal. That means the speed they're spinning around the ship and keeping themselves turning and keeping the ship, Perseus desperately turning its turrets to try to hit them or aiming its torps at them. It would be very difficult for the one small ship to basically keep both ships occupied. But there would be some risk of friendly fire where the Perseuses would be firing size 7 shells at each other, hitting, in theory, the other Perseus. But I could see a situation where two partnered up Perseuses could patrol together and do some very interesting things. But honestly, I would almost prefer having a pair of vanguards following around a Perseus or something like that. But once again, we're not grading this based on what it can't bring. I give the ship a value of 4 because I do believe that it is rather high cost in USD. So for my value section, I compared the values to their in-game resources and what we think they're going to cost once these ships are finally out, or if some ships that are out, what they actually do cost. And there is a consensus that because this is a military ship, there's what's often called the military tax. It's a lot like the alien tax you hear more about, but in the military tax, there is still something that is very alive and very real in the sense of this is a rather armored ship with rather large weaponry, and it has military-grade equipment on board, etc., and so you pay more. And unfortunately, that kind of takes away a lot of the wind out of the sails for its score. For tech debt, it has a rather high score, which means it has limited amounts of equipment on board that is not already known or already available. Mainly, its tech debt is in its engineering and components that are larger in size and scale than most ships that are currently in the game. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it should just be noted that that's kind of my near future kind of factoring in on the tech debt side. And the tech debt, you could debate whether or not you want to score without that. You can feel free to do it yourself as well. But in general, this actually has a pretty good tech debt in the sense of I can see this ship being released rather quickly, especially because CIG said they're turning their focus towards the Polaris and then the Perseus and the Nautilus, enjoying those RSI kits that they can cross over into the other ships. So that's pretty good for it. As for the Perseus's combat logistics, it gets a 2 because once again it has extremely limited capacities for supporting the fleet or supporting org operations other than its big weaponry it drags around, which once again is nothing bad. It's just worth noting it is it's a single vision ship for the most part. And a reminder that combat logistics is getting personnel and ground and air vehicles into place, or space vehicles in this case. And finally, its final category is services. It gets also a 2 in services. Services being the it factor, where you can have org support. Additionally, it turns inward, so it's services for the crew on board as well as the fleet that follows it around. And this ship offers extremely limited services. One of the few things it can claim is that it has a reasonable little bit of cargo it can store, although we don't know just how much of that's going to be ammunition if you're on a longer patrol, etc., etc. So you can see how this ship is truly a lightning rod, if you will, when it comes to quasi-capitals, in the sense of it's an expensive ask, especially for how much credit you have tied up in this ship. However, it is useful, it does have a place, and you can have it running with only 3 to 4 crew and have it competently ran, which I can't say for many of the ships on this list. So it certainly has a place.
Nautilus Fleet Command, we need mines ASAP on the Perseus's inbound vector. I'm sorry, but the best I can do is I can get your coverage of 2 Freelancer MISs. That's all I can get. You're going to need 4 gap mines out there if you got them. Put the rest as regular mines. Keep that vector busy. Keep it busy and then get out of there. Out.
What to say about a Nautilus that hasn't already been said? To me, the Nautilus is a very balanced ship. If you look at my notes here, I have a 7 and 7 for offense and defense, and then a 10 for utility, which kind of goes through the roof a little bit because of its unique traits. Being able to handle mines that are Gatling mines, regular mines, and be able to keep them stocked with fuel, keep them going, steal enemy mines with the assistance of their remote capacities on board. It's an exciting ship. And then you slap a size 7 on the front and a couple turrets. It's a unique ship for sure. I think that this is an underrated vessel. It's very interesting that its frontal vector is so well armored, yet its back end is designed to have hyper utility, and it truly is going to come into its own. As a quasi-cap, once again, I gave it 10 for utility, 7 for ease of use, because I believe there is going to be a bit of a learning curve deploying those mines, especially mines that have turrets on board and placing mines correctly that need to use their fuel to get close to the targets to attack. I think there can be 2 different kind of play styles with those mines. For its maneuverability, I gave it an 8. All signs that are pointing to a reasonable thruster layout and a reasonable amount of capabilities, and it does show in its pictures it landed and such, and it seems to have pretty good maneuverability to the mission space. Additionally, the mines being able to go off into their own places is critical to me. And once again, its remote support capacities should give it some extra value there. VTOL is a little bit of a question mark, so I took some points off, but I do not see this ship as floundering in Atmo. And it certainly can go there, of course. Its value to me is a 7. It's a little low for what it is, but there are going to be far lower on this list, so put your pitchforks down. And unfortunately, one of the biggest problems for it is its tech debt. Mines have to be developed of 2 different kinds to make this ship properly work. And how are those mines going to be serviced? How are those mines going to be taken? How is ownership going to work? How is theft of these mines going to work, where you will get crime stats and such in safe environments? And can you place mines outside of, say, Lorville, right outside of the most common directions you're exiting Tisa Spaceport into out of Atmo? Are you just about to fill it with mines, or is that going to be cleared? Are there going to be minesweepers that are constantly going to be operating in these areas, like their own Nautiluses, their own Carracks with the drones on board that can handle that as well, doing remote capacities off of those ships? There's a lot of question marks I have with the Nautilus, but its remote abilities, its actual mines, I see them as a lot of tech debt, but it's still an amazing ship. Going back again to combat logistics, I gave it a 10, and might be a little bit controversial, but I see the mines as the way to help get the people and the vehicles into the places they belong and harass those who shouldn't be there. I also think the mines have an immense amount of combat logistics capacity, in a way like to clear out an area. Almost like if you don't have an A2 on standby, can you just chuck mines out? That remains to be seen, but it would be very interesting if you, with a skilled pilot and a skilled team working the back, can you truly just kind of chuck these mines out, clear out an area? And it does have a little decent bit of space for operating vehicles through, so it would be interesting to see what the Nautilus is going to shape up to. That could change over time. As a quasi-cap, I still gave it a 5 for services. Its services are pretty limited, but we're talking about a time when these vehicles can be fleshed out in the future. We're talking about a time period where they have a lot of unique roles that they can fulfill. And once again, the fact you have the mines, the fact you have those remote capacities with the Nemo drones, I just feel that this ship is going to be everywhere it needs to be. And it certainly kind of twisted my own categories around a little bit. With the logistics, I had to stop and think, are drones logistics? Is getting drones into the correct positions, is that considered part of combat logistics? And honestly, I had to come back with the answer is yes. If it's bringing friendly units to the battlefield, whether they're people or drones or vehicles, whether they're air vehicles or ground vehicles, to me that's a role, and it's the only one that can truly do it without wasting a Carrack on this. To me, the Carrack's secondary nature of having a couple drones, I think it's 4 in its bays, it is honestly not necessary and not worth it to just bring an entire Carrack out, when you could have a Nautilus that can not only take and maintain drones, but also deploy so many of them, some mines and drones at the same time, so many of them, and truly control that battle space and really make a unique role. I see it as a vital tool in combat logistics, but I see it as an org tool. Once in a while, you will deploy this thing. Not every single mission will require one of these. And also, deploying dozens of mines is going to be a time-consuming effort. It's going to be a massive play here. I also think haulers are going to be severely underrated until people realize that you're going to want to reload this thing. You're going to want to deploy your mines, and you're going to burn through drones, and then you're going to want to go back and get another full load. And I can't help but notice that that's probably going to be a big part of supporting this vessel to really make it shine. Reminder, this is obligatory, that when you're up in space, especially, you can go in many different directions. So mines are going to be less valuable unless CIG makes the explosion radius and the speed of these mines extremely high. Also, CIG has gone out of their way in the past to state that these mines will not completely destroy a capital ship, but could in theory disable and harass a quasi-cap, even a cap in some ways if it get lucky. And this is something that you will not want to get hit with. That's the important part. So it could slow down an enemy fleet and buy your fleet time if you don't have the same type of situations. It also could create scenarios that are less than ideal for your enemy. While they're busy trying to slow down and avoid these mines and get around them or sweep them, you could swoop in and take the advantage, press the momentum. So I see this as a very interesting tool, and certainly nothing to ignore. And if you ignore it at your own peril.
All ships, friendly BMM just landed on grid. It just got pulled in by the Manus. Manus, disable your web. We need to escort this thing out. It's going to Lagrange 2. Hold this ground. Keep this thing alive. BMM Elegance, direct comms. I really hope you got a defender on board or something in that hangar. You better pop it and get those size 8 guns going. We're trying to give as much as we can coverage. We just undeployed our mantises. We're gonna do our best to get you out of here, but you gotta help fight until you get to that edge. I tell you what, you picked a heck of a time to come visit the outpost.
Oh, we finally got to one, I think, that I'm going to rustle somebody's feathers about. The Merchantman. The Banu Merchantman, one of the most legendary and value-added ships in the history of StarCitizen as a project. I gotta say that one of the biggest surprises to this day I get from newer folks to the community is the shock of the fact that this thing has a pair of size 8 cannons hidden in the front of it. And the fact that it has so many firepower-based turrets, size 4s and 3s, rocking around it, both in the remote and the manned categories. And honestly, that's not even scratching the surface. You got a pair of size 5s on top. You got PDSs all over this thing. It's bristling with them. Last we counted, it was 3 PDSs. And honestly, that's probably going to go up based on the Liberator having 2 PDSs alone. This ship is going to be extremely valuable for its marketplace, which is multiple stories and has a courtyard-style internal area that is all able to be accessed and is best suited for landing. Landing at an outpost, landing at a station that still has a pad, like back in the old days of PO, if you had enough space to fit it. And that brings up a whole nother point, that this ship is very difficult to land in places because it has to barely fit on a large pad. In fact, it has special wings that articulate and fold and add a tremendous amount of tech debt. More about that in a minute. That they had to defeat while they were trying to work this ship last time it was in the pipeline. So, let's kind of dive right into this, or we'll be talking all day about this amazing ship. With so much firepower and defensive PDSs and such, I gave it a 10 and a 6. And the reason for that is that the 10 is offense is the forward-facing pair of size 8s are not exactly well suited against smaller vessels that will keep transversal, that will keep fighting against it, and it has a hangar that can fit a single defender or another type of ship, or maybe you can even squeeze in 2 smaller fighters in there if you really have some skilled pilots working them. But at the end of the day, it only has so much defenses. Additionally, if they stick to the triple PDSs, which I think they will go up a little bit, maybe 4 or even 5 PDSs when this is finally all said and done. But there's a couple thoughts here. All PDSs might not be alike, and also it may be to balance the ship, that it is susceptible to torpedoes after it blows through those PDSs on one side of it. You will have to spin the entire ship, and hopefully you haven't lost a lot of your main thrusters in order to present more PDSs that still have ammo, or it is just going to start eating torps. And when this thing goes down, it's going to be very expensive to replace, and damage is going to be very difficult if they continue with the alien tax when it comes to repairs and replacement of this exotic, amazing vessel. That being said, its utility is extensive. It has a massive cargo hold on board, and it has a wonderful Gravlev-style system to deploy things, which will work in space as well as on ground side and planet side, moon side, etc. Additionally, it has a nice gantry that works inside there, where it can tractor beam things in and out of there pretty easily. I've even suggested in the past, and I stand by this, that a rack of Furies could be fitted inside the cargo bay, but they just wouldn't be the most elegant in releasing from that bay quickly. But they could be done. I think the ease of use out of 4 is because of the crew size, because of the exotic nature, because of the many different talents you will require of your crew to really utilize this ship properly. And its value is at an 8 with an asterisk because early adopters had $250 USD or less, far less in some cases, invested into this ship to get it and rose the BMM coin all the way up as the ship value went up and up and up over the years. Whereas even newcomers, I feel that an 8 is a fair estimate. So I would argue it is I'm splitting the difference here. I would argue it's a 6 value now because I think it's close to the cost it's going to be when it's released. But it's a 10 value if you got in back in the day. So I see it as an in-between on the value. I'm trying to be fair to the ship and to the community. Additionally, tech debt's a 2 because of many of the things I've already described about the folding arms on it with its winglets. And also, it's immense amount of difficulties that you face when you are getting in and out of the turrets. When you are trying to model this ship, it's going to be extensively difficult, and every single thing had to be custom designed, even down to the types of chairs it has. Remember that the ship is designed for the Banu. They are extremely tall, they are slender in some ways, and basically, they are a different species. And by its nature, they are going to be immensely different in what they value. And this ship is truly a beautiful ship, but it will have some learning curve that you will face, for lack of a better term, as the devs experienced while they were making this ship. It has been backburnered, if you haven't heard, for development of the Polaris, Perseus, and Nautilus. Apologies, I'm just the messenger here. And the idea is that they are hoping to knock out all of that back catalog, and some people theorize more ships, such as the Apollo. But anyway, back to topic, that the kit that they can use will be used across them, and therefore that was a better use of current developing time, and then hopefully go back to the BMM soon after that. So it is a ways out, but it is still an amazing ship, and its loaners currently being a C2 Herc, and the Defender is actually quite nice. The Defender is a wonderful vessel. The Herc series is nice. I could probably see that being updated when the Lib finally comes out. It'd be nice to see a Liberator as a loaner if the Lib comes out before the BMM, which some people believe may be the case, myself included, but we'll see. Sticking to the topics at hand, I would say that it's a wonderful ship. Its services are at 10 because it basically rivals that of a small capital ship in services, especially when you consider the marketplace for org use, for friendly use, and for just random people and NPCs to sell to them. And remember that the market can double as a place to distribute goods to the rest of your organization and friendlies to your organization before or after a fight. So if you can put at cost ammunition, weapon systems, armor, healing supplies, utility supplies, everything you could think of inside those marketplace spaces. Replacement modules for ships you can put at cost or even cheaper, and you can track those sales. So this would be a really interesting way, and that cargo hold is massive right next door, so you can keep funneling more and more resources into the store area. So aside from the Kraken Privateer, there really isn't anything else that can offer that capacity in such a professional manner, and in a way where you don't have random org people wandering through the vast cargo hold, and there's no tracking, there's no accountability at all. So just bear that in the back of your mind, that this ship is truly going to be unique. Additionally, it has a tremendous amount of habitation, and it has one of the interesting things, a lot of the Kraken Privateer and a few other ships on the list, where it has the visitor side, and then it has the crew side. So there is some security measures in general. And in some of the concept art, there was suggested to be a possible size 1 turret placed at the top of the market area that could shoot down into the lower areas. We have yet to see if that's just a utility mount or that's a weapon mount. CIG has never confirmed that, but it is there in the pictures. We'll see. This is a ship of a lot of mysteries and a lot of exploration, I think, to find. And it, once again, has a tremendous amount to offer. And let's keep moving.
All right, BMM is clear. I'm hearing from long range that there's nothing in its direction. Great work, everybody. It's still alive. All right, we're hearing Liberator's Landing. Liberator's Landing, there's a pair of them. Focus down, Liberator also. Liberator also. I'm seeing 4 Super Hornets. CIC, start marking them off. Pick your battles, everybody. Pick your battles. Remember the arrow fit. Arrow close fits, get in there. Arrow close fits, get in there. Start getting those off. Call your targets. Call your targets. Stay with your wingman. Liberator also. I need its PDSs ran out now. Okay. Tallies, burst down from below. Burst down from below. Waste those PDSs, and then let's pop this thing. Damn. Hold torps. Hold torps. Hold torps. It got off grid.
The most exciting ships right now, to me, in this category of quasi-caps, is the Liberator. And honestly, it's one of the most exciting ships, period, right now. To me, this is part of the path to Pyro. Yes, I'm still saying that, everybody. But I think there needs to be some expectation setting on what exactly the Liberator is and isn't. And do keep in mind its price point. Value, spoiler alerts, is going to be a big topic on this. So for offense, I give it a 5, and I only give it a 5 because of the fact it can fit 2 properly sized fighters on board. I can easily see this thing managing and rearming and refitting by hand, not by pad services. 2 medium fighters, no problem. And then a small light fighter stacked off the front, or an extra small pad of whatever you prefer. Once again, it is not using the services. You have to hand go over there with the most recent things that we've seen with tractor beams being able to refit up with new missiles out in the field, and over time be able to rearm this thing with weaponry as needed that aren't energy-based weapons. So whatnot. There is 1-man turret that you're able to operate, and a pair of PDSs. But because of the nature of the ship and because of where the PDSs are, you basically are only able to use one or the other once something gets close. So once you get closer, then what the management of the turret can do on top, and only on top, that turret has good range, but it only is on top, you have a single PDS on the bottom of the ship. I see a lot of people, as soon as they see a lib on the field, as prioritizing attacking from below. Also, I see liberators on the flip side of that prioritizing getting to the ground as quickly as possible. If they're deploying stuff and they're going to be shot at anyway, I would rather be down on the ground unloading as quickly as possible while I'm getting attacked and have my man turret facing the target and having at least 1 PDS active, and then trying to get out of dodge as quickly as possible as soon as the threat is passed, preferably, or more realistically, just get out of dodge. But I do see this thing as like diving down as quickly as possible if the enemy's already attacking it, and trying not to expose its softer underbelly. Nothing good can come from this ship from that's going to happen to it from below. So I give it a 3 on its defense. But where it makes up for a lot of that is in its utility. I give it a 10 for utility. It can carry a tremendous amount of cargo, over 400 SCU. We're talking about with a huge amount of potential, because the Herc dwarfs this thing. Even the mighty C2. And of course the M2 with its smaller size due to its weight concerns, not due to its actual space interior. This thing is very good for vehicle work, and it can still carry that cargo while it's carrying ground and air and space vehicles. Very exciting ship, ship, and I would say that out of many, this is one of the most exciting, especially because it has a 7 for ease of use. It is relatively straightforward. I do turn it down a little bit due to the PDSs. There is going to be a little bit of a learning curve. Also, learning how to act as a ferry for other players, especially players that are public-facing, so not your best friends, basically, not your org mates, not your best friends. You're going to need to remember that you have to have an etiquette on board, a respect for them, and also keep a close eye on them. And this ship has 2 faces. It has a ship in the sense of the engineering, the bridge area, the man turret area, and the crew area for the 2 beds, only 2 beds on board. It needs to be on its own. And then you have your public facing on if you're facing the front of the ship, on the right side of the ship, when you're looking right at it, that would be where the ready room is for your passengers. And right now there's just jump seats. So they won't fall around on the floor when you're taking off and landing and doing evasive maneuvers, but at the same time, there's no beds for them to crash. It is kind of meant to be a one-way ferry between Stanton and Pyro, and vice versa, Pyro to Stanton, and it is a mission-critical ship for a lot of folks. And because of its relatively reasonable value, it came in on a war bond of 500 USD, and it's currently at a value of 575 USD, which is amazing for the price point. A lot of people could afford this or chip in together, and it also, to me, indicates in game it's not going to cost that much, but we still are waiting and seeing. Obviously, it has to be released, and then a patch or two have to go by, and then we'll truly see what the value is. But I could see an org working towards this thing, and it would be very valuable for them. So if you can't afford one now, you can, of course, buy one in game later on. The tech debt, to me, has an excellent 9 because there's very limited tech debt. The only tech debt is those PDSs, to me, because it doesn't even have pad support. And the combat logistics, of course, is at a 9, with a heavy addendum here that, as I pointed out before at the beginning and really bashed on it for, it has extremely limited offense and defense, and it even doesn't have that much armor and shielding for its size. It is very large. It's a very big target. It is relying heavily on the craft that are on the pads. That's even per the dev Q&A, that it is relying heavily on those to really influence the fight. So a pair of Super Hornets, for example, a pair of Hurricanes on board, and then maybe a Pisces at the front with all 4 size 1 weapons on board is really what it's relying on. So it's an interesting ship. For services, I gave it a 4. It has extremely limited services, and like I pointed out, the crew habitations are very limited. It's like a 2 beds just for the crew alone, and it does no regen. It has no health regen like the BMM we've discussed already, but neither does the Nautilus and Perseus. This ship has its purposes. It has its role. It's going to be in a lot of fleets, and just keep in mind its limitations, and you will go far with it. Wanted to add something here after the fact, but I thought about it, and the reason I presented the Liberators as a pair that got on grid and then got out of there after they deployed their ships was very obvious. It is not meant to stay and stand and fight. And in a pair, by having those extra PDSs working together and its man turrets working together, they may have a little more survivability acting together than acting solo. Additionally, being able to kind of create a critical mass of smaller craft to be able to send in as a whole squadron on the fight. Now, obviously, some of these ships that you're deploying would probably have enough long legs to be able to deploy themselves, but the Liberator itself may be able to help soak some of the damage, PDS off some of the torps and missiles that are incoming when you first land on grid at a fight. There may be some actual value even to ships that don't have longer reach. Additionally, one of the other things to keep in mind is probably in the recording I should have mentioned like 6 or 7 Furies coming out of them as well, across both of them, not each, but because I could definitely see the vehicle bay in the bottom, especially in a desperate situation, deploying a few Furies and getting them out on the grid to places they normally wouldn't be able to reach, and then the Liberator would leave the fight, not stay on grid in this huge fleet battle.
Crucible Antares, direct comms from Fleet Command up above. Get your folks deployed. We need you up here. We have a Perseus. Sort of. It's wedged into the side of an Idris right now, and its engines were sabotaged by its crew, but we took the dang thing. We really need you up here. We're going to get your engines running, and then we're going to pull you and the Perseus back off grid until after this fight's going. So far, it's looking like it's going our way, but at least we can get this Perseus out of here. And, yeah, get up here. Be safe about it. Let me know when you're about 30 seconds from grid.
With everything I want to talk about with the Crucible, bear in mind that it is in the process of being reworked before it even enters the pipeline. Sorry, I'm the messenger, as I mentioned before, but do bear that in mind. We're talking about a ship with a single pair of size 4s on a turret currently. I'd imagine that's going to be heavily reconcepted, and I'd imagine in the reconcept that it will also have at least a pair of PDSs if the Liberator is any indication. With that negative out of the way, that's why I gave it a 3 for offense and a 3 for defense. I still left it at a 3, though, because my thoughts were the PDSs in the future, which may or may not happen, to be fair, so I probably could have bumped that up slightly if I really wanted to. But I believe that the pad it has could be utilized as an impromptu fighter to defend the ship. And the Crucible is highly likely to still maintain why I gave it a 10 utility score, in the sense of you will be able to use the ship on 2 sides. One is a pad designed to hold a fighter and heavily repair the thing, but second, more importantly, you can flip the entire command module piece in the center, the workspace, the bridge, whatever you want to call it. You can flip that entire space around, and you can operate on much larger ships. Like, for example, a Perseus that's slammed into the side of an Idris. It technically had a pair of large shields, but that will most likely be reworked during its reconcepting, because CIG has made clear that the shielding is basically changing dramatically from what we've known in the past. That was revealed during the 600i reworks, and it does enjoy having a large radar. And currently, it has smaller computers, medium and small computers on board, large cooler, large power plant. Now, once again, this is a longer term vision of this ship is going to be reconcepted, so I would not keep too much invested in this ship if you have a smaller fleet. But at 350 USD standalone, I gotta say that it's doing okay. You can't really go wrong with this ship, especially if your org doesn't already have one. I see it as a ship that is critical for its utility necessarily, but it does have a high skill cap, hence the 5 ease of use. There's a big learning curve, and it's 7 in maneuverability, because while it does have a reasonable amount of, an amazing amount of utility, in some cases some of the only ship that can do certain things that effectively, and efficiently is the better word I would use, it still has, it does take some hit in maneuverability to carry all that extra weight and things around. That being said, it's got a 10 in value because it is one of the only ships in the game that can help fix a cap ship and bring it back up well enough so it can limp back home, based on what we have heard from the concepting. And it's not going to be doing that anytime soon with a tech debt of 3, because there's so many different things that need to be developed for this ship. Its combat logistics is at 10 because, once again, it can ideally repair a cap ship and get it off out of the fight, out of a danger zone, and get it back to safety. And this, to me, is a very important thing. If the PDSs fail, they glitch, they get overwhelmed, they get E-War tricked, whatever the case may be, and a set of Ares ballistics come through and just wail on a ship and knock out its engine or two, a Crucible is absolutely critical to keep a cap ship or a quasi-cap in the game. And of course, ships smaller than that, it can help take care of as well day to day. And for services, it has extremely limited services. However, do bear in mind, I gave it a 4 because I'm picturing that it'll constantly be ushering out fighters to refuel and fix them up, and probably even have a few extra common arms on board and ammunition for them to kind of get them back in the fight, keep them happy, and get them going. I see somebody who is maybe the less active of the group in the org, but loves hanging out with everybody. And I mean active as in going out and fighting or mining and such, kind of hanging out with one of these, sitting in their hangar while they're tuning their ships, talking with everybody. And then when somebody needs help, they swoop out with this and come and save the day. If you're that kind of person and this ship kind of speaks to you, nothing I say or don't say is going to get you excited or not. It's your ship. There's always going to be that person who really enjoys these hyper utility vessels that are incredibly niche, but when you need them, you need them. That's what this ship is. I do see these, unfortunately, as in the more risky situations as disposable. Even losing 2 Crucibles will likely be less important than losing a proper cap ship that's been completely upfit, up-armed with top-of-the-line gear, reputation-based gear that you cannot just replace with insurance. This ship is... I would willingly lose 1 or 2 of these to save a Jav, to save maybe even an Idris that's been upfitted to an M with a whole bunch of other fancy stuff on board, that even if I do get insurance for it, it may take weeks to get replaced. So that's the thing about Crucibles to me, is do bear that in mind. After I just said all that wholesome stuff about it, these things are going to be destroyed a few times. There will be fleets surrounding Crucibles to defend them, to get them out to a broken ship, to either take it back or take it. Whether you're there for good, nefarious, or just neutral reasons. I see these ships as very valuable, and their services are very valuable. But do keep in mind that you have a big target painted on your back, because plain and simple, you can do things that others can't, and you have the possibility of the big loot prize being taken off grid once you fix it up and your friends fly off in it. So this thing will be prioritied, and it will be primaried many, many times. As long as you know what you're getting into, this is a wonderful ship.
Pioneer new beginnings, Pioneer new beginnings. This is Fleet Command, greetings from up above. We're holding grid, things are going okay, but I don't feel comfortable with you here. We're hearing about there's a few more things on long range scan, we're still getting fuzzy reception, they're E-warning us hard. I need you to pack it up, produce what you can, and get on out of there. I can only dedicate a couple sabers to this job, but we will get you through. Don't worry about that. As long as you get out of here in the next couple minutes, pack it up. Thank you for your services. I hope the outpost is well reinforced. The ground crew thanks you very much for putting in those turrets. Let's hope they hold. Thanks again. See you on the flip side.
If you thought the Liberator was the story of two ships, wait till you hear about the Pioneer. I gave it a 3 and a 4 for its offense and defense, primarily because when it is actually active in its current concept, there's a key word there, current, its turrets are mostly on top of the vessel. And the reason for that is it is well suited to defending itself when it's on the ground building things, as the giant 3D printer it is. Full disclosure, I love this ship, but it is not there to defend itself. If this thing has to defend itself, it's a very dark day, it's a very bad day, and the defenses have not really did their job. So what the Pioneer is meant to do is go in, configure itself for building nowadays modules and pieces, components, whatever you want to call them, to build outposts on the ground, ground-based outposts. It cannot produce electronics, it cannot produce more advanced equipment, but it can produce mounts and buildings and such to attach things to that you then bring in smaller equipment for. Additionally, it is not the only way to build ground-based outpost, at least as of that was last explained by CIG a while ago. Basically, this is the most efficient way to build, the cheapest way to build, but you absolutely can bring very, very large hauling ships in, deploy the parts that are purchased at higher rates of cost somewhere else, like at markets, and then you build. But if you're trying to build a large outpost, this is the way to do it. You have a Pioneer come in, or you pay a Pioneer to come in for their services, and they produce the exact parts you want. Right on the bridge, there's a designer system where you can pick and choose what you're building next, and you watch it go through the production system, which is basically when the ship deploys itself on the ground. The turrets are mainly situated on top of the vessel to defend it on the ground, like I've mentioned. And I give it a 10 in utility because I'm considering when it is deployed, it is the only ship that can truly do this effectively without having a stream of hard-to-defend haulers doing their job. And this is a key thing. It can be used for more utility by building a area, such as a vehicle maintenance bay is one of the descriptions of one of the early things that they've described, all the way down to refineries and all sorts of other crazy things. And all those things are valuable because you could actually have production right on the spot for all sorts of military gear and all sorts of things that orgs need right on the spot, even if you're being blockaded. So ease of use is at a 1 because there's an immense learning curve to running a gigantic industrial ship that happens to be a 3D printer. And its maneuverability is at a 7. It has reasonable VTOL. Its thrusters can turn a lot like the Idris's. And its value to me is also at a 7 because it is at the top of its game, and it will be a very valuable ship in-game and rather rare. It's a rather niche ship. Its tech deck is at a 1. As I gave it such a low mark because there is so many things that are unknown. The entire player outpost system has to be figured out, has to be ironed out, all of its kinks and issues. And the ship itself, of course, has many things it has to do. I give its combat logistics a 10 with a massive addendum here that I am considering the fact it can deploy whole pads and support locations, places where you could stage your crew between fights. possibly even like medical clinics and things it can build. Remember, you have to fill them with other things that are going to have to be brought in on other ships or inside the 600 SCU hold of the Pioneer. And it still needs to have space for its building components, by the way, the raw materials to build its building components. But I definitely consider it as a place that you can build a beachheads with. You could build a small outpost to attack a location with this thing and equalize the battle space. Spawn in the future, ideally spawning vehicles and maybe even ships, etc., or at the very least maintaining them. So that is something that we've definitely heard about, is that you can have maintenance on there. And like I said, once again, hopefully health clinics and other things like that, and habitation places where people can log out once again between fights. Additionally, I give it service as a 10. It is very close to dancing around the capital versus quasi cap, but I decided to put it in the quasi capital section because it doesn't have a brig. It doesn't have some of the other in the weeds type things that a proper capital has to be truly designated as a capital. And additionally, it's not a true combat capital in the sense of what we're scoring here. Although that is certainly up for debate. It does have a landing pad. It does have a large amount of turrets. I'm sure it will gain a ton of PDSs in the rework. And it's going to be a very valuable ship. Even at 850 USD credit, I still see it as a wonderfully valuable ship and a truly one of a kind. As a reminder, though, this is definitely an org-based ship. This is something that you will probably just buy in game by pooling your resources, or hopefully in the future being able to build one, etc., etc. I would definitely see that. And don't forget, you can always turn to people that have these that are friendly and organize contracts to build these things, or at the very least neutral to you. But in combat, I definitely probably people that you trust or people that are in your org that are building with them. But still, I see this as a very unique system and truly, truly a one-of-a-kind vessel.
All right, our scanners are finally working it out. Fleet, we need to start heading on 270, 270. Start moving that direction. There's a Carrack out there. That's where this Pisces and all of these drones are coming from that are messing with the minefield. I don't know how the heck it got over there, but it needs to be disabled. Take out the drones first to try to ignore the Pisces unless it's doing too much damage. But we got to take care of this now. Scouts, go find that Carrack. Don't get close. Remember, it's got its turrets. It's got good placement there. Just be careful.
What do you know? That dang Carrack I was talking about earlier is messing with our Nautilus. Remember, the Carrack has a rack of drones on board, and of course it's small Pisces Bay, so it can really do some games. Additionally, you can probably fit some Furies in that frontage. If you're brave enough, you could probably fit one Fury. But plain and simple, its offense and defense to me are pretty interesting. It's one of the few ships that actually has better defense than offense, and I'll explain this. It's got a lot of manned and remote turrets going on board, and they're actually reasonable size. What you're dealing with is racks of size 4 weapon systems, both in the manned and remote categories. And they kind of have like what I would call a reverse cross configuration. So picture the ship as a big T, and on the corners and on the top and the bottom, it has turrets and turrets and turrets. And if you have enough people that are running those turrets, suddenly now this ship is pretty dang useful. Additionally, of course, it has countermeasures just like other ships, and it has enough turrets that arguably larger torps and such, you may be able to do enough damage to keep them off of you. Additionally, relying on its maneuverability, jumping ahead a little bit, you can make yourself a pretty easygoing target, and it has nice scanning arrays that will allow you to see most of the stuff going on as well as do your primary job. More on that in a minute. I give it a 10 in utility due to the drones, due to the fact it is modular. So those bottom areas that hold the cargo can actually be replaced in the future with different modular items. And we're not sure what they are yet, but anything is going to be great to be able to swap out. Additionally, its easy use is at a 7. It's already in game. People are familiarized with it, even though it is an advanced ship. I do give it a 7 because those drones will be a learning curve, and its new scanners, when you start hunting jump points, which is what its main job is, will certainly change that game a little bit. But for now, I give it a 7, and I kind of feel comfortable with that. Once again, it's 8 in maneuverability, as I mentioned before. It has pretty reasonable maneuverability for its job, even in Atmo. And its value, I put it in 8. This is another one of those averages between the people who got it extremely early and the people that got it more recently. I still think that it is a good price. I wish it was cheaper for folks, just like any ship price-wise. But for sitting around the 600 USD price point and probably dipping above, I still see it as a great ship with a lot of value, and it's very useful, especially one of these in an org fleet will certainly help it find jump points and locate the next positions and kind of look ahead for the fleet. Additionally, its tech debt's only at a 7. It's already in game. It does have that modularity in the drone issues and its engineering bay. I give it a 9 in combat logistics and services, primarily because it has a reasonable amount of habs, although there is some wasted space on this older design, with a lot of bathroom space put in it, strangely, and R&R space that really could have used a few more habs, but it is what it is. It's got a reasonable amount. It has a good amount of crew output. And in its services, it does offer regen. It does offer proper food and drink, like many of the ships on this list. And it does offer a ground vehicle area as well as a ship vehicle area where you can move back and forth personnel very easily. And of course, on its primary services, it does have a lot of great utility to this vessel. I think its medical really sets it apart and really makes people give pause, and certainly gave it a lot of leeway against, like, for example, the likes of the 600i Explorer. Even though it's more expensive, people still paused and looked hard at this ship, and they may look more at the 600i Explorer in the future when it has a proper armory, when it has the regen capacity as well, and it still enjoys the newer design of the ship, literally in lore, as well as actually just been designed more recently in the pipeline. Don't forget, this ship will get a pass, and once again, it is a older ship in lore, but that doesn't mean that they won't change its flow a little bit, and obviously add its modularity, maybe drop its crew size slightly to make it more balanced, so more PDSs, maybe slightly less turrets would be ideal for its size, but honestly, it's a great ship. If you can staff the thing, it's a good to go.
Odyssey Causland, direct from Fleet Command above. I heard you've recovered your fighter. I heard you're good to go. The Pioneer's out of the area. Thank you for your work. I gotta ask another weird role for you. We've got a Carrack that's harassing our scouts. I really don't have a lot to throw at it, and it's kind of like playing grid games where it's running off the fight, and it keeps coming back to attack our mines and try to steal them. Is there any way you can get up there and start hammering on that thing? Alright, thanks. Godspeed up there.
The Odyssey, the other quasi-capital explorer ship that is a lightning rod of discussion. It sacrifices its modularity for a larger hangar that also has a very large area next to it that could fit ground vehicles or actually properly cargo like it's supposed to. It's 252 SDU cargo before refactor. And it also enjoys a medical bay with regen, just like the Carrack. But if you notice, it has slightly more offense because it's running 3 turrets of size 5s, 2 on top, which means that when it's angled correctly, you can really put a lot of hurt onto an enemy target. And it has a full-size hangar instead of the pocket hangar like the Carrack has that can fit the Pisces. This instead could fit a full-size fighter, like a medium-class fighter could comfortably fit in this depending on which one it is. So you've got a lot of work in there that adds to its utility value. Additionally, it can refuel itself, but in our topics that we're covering, it's not really that important. But it can't really do very much refueling on like an industrial level. It's more just to refuel itself. Now, when I kind of keep diving through this, I think of its ease of use, and I like the fact that its bridge is designed to kind of bring the entire team together. It's the Star Trek ship, for lack of a better term, of StarCitizen, and it also enjoys that ease of use because of that. It does have long-range scanners that are more tuned to find anomalies, not jump points, though, and it tends to be on the scientific side than combat. So it's an even-keeled ship for combat, but it does have its needs that I think it meets that kind of eclipse that. So when I'm talking about maneuverability, I think of its ability to maneuver to mission. I think of its maneuverability in space. They seem to be solid. I do not notice that there's a tremendous amount of VTOL, but I gave it an average, a little bit above average 7 for its maneuverability, and its value to me is also at a 7, sitting at a price point that's kind of in between. It's not quite knows where it wants to be. Maybe even arguably a little too expensive, which is the reason I gave it a little bit of a drop there compared to the Carrack. I'm being careful here. I know there's camps for both these ships. The tech debt is rather high because it does have some additional systems that the Carrack already enjoys using, and it has its own refinery on board, which has to be worked out. How exactly that's going to work, and the arm at the front that's custom and bespoke for the ship, and its scanning arrays are going to be different than the Carrack's. So I gave it a 5 for its tech debt, but that doesn't mean that it's not impossible for this thing to come out, and it certainly will be an interesting ship when it does. I gave it a 10 for its combat logistics because remember, I'm stacking it against the other quasi capitals, not against capitals. And for quasi cap, having a hangar of this scale, a full true hangar that can fit a reasonable sized ship and still have all that space next to it for ground vehicles is going to be very useful. I would argue that it edges out the Carrack because while it doesn't have drones and it doesn't have the modularity, so we may see the Carrack jump itself to 10 on combat logistics if that modularity pans out the right way. What we already know this ship has and what it is already gray boxed for are very, very exciting. I also gave it a 9 in its services, just like the Carrack. So this ship to me is one of those ships that it almost is too safe. Didn't take enough chances, dare I say it, in its design, and unfortunately its refinery is not designed and configured in such a way where it can make large amounts of fuel, where the fleet could suddenly not have a Starfarer because it has an Odyssey. I hope CIG kind of rethinks that by the time this thing finally is released, and that it can produce enough fuel to kind of replace the original vision of a Starfarer in the sense that it can scoop fuel, produce the fuel on site, and then be able to distribute it amongst the fleet to at least to some extent because of the sheer size, cost, and crew of this ship. That would suddenly elevate it to a 10 for services and, of course, keep it at a 10 for combat logistics and make its tech debt even worse. But still, I think it's a very exciting ship. I think that this ship has a lot of places it can go, and in combat, it's not even its primary role. Much like the Carrack, it's really meant to go explore places people have not been and also provide some assistance in certain roles to a fleet only as like a secondary measure. But still, it's worth mentioning that it is a great ship for that role.
Oh man, the enemy's getting desperate. There's a Galaxy that just landed on grid. It looks like they're trying to drop crew members off back on some of these ships. Do not allow that Galaxy to get close to the enemy fleet. We can't allow it. We can't allow this thing to be deploying. So far, I see a Pisces coming out the back. Pop the Pisces. Pop the Pisces.
Reminder earlier in the discussions here, I did mention some turrets with the size blank and such. The guns are, of course, one size smaller on our turrets. I apologize for any confusion. I put together a lot for this video. Don't forget to like the video if you have appreciated it so far. Let's get right into the Galaxy. So with the Galaxy, I gave it a 6 and 6, another average, right below the Odyssey, interestingly, on the average chart there. And it's 3 size 6 remote turrets with size 5 dual weapons on board of each. Have nice range of motion. However, as I talked about with Mason on the Galaxy when we had a video about that, I'll put that in the end of this video. The Galaxy has a kind of a blind spot in the back where the hangar is, and it really only deploys basically a Pisces out the back of the ship. So you got to remember that this ship is a rather large ship with a big blind spot, but it is what it is. Has a ton of utility, sitting at 8 utility score because of its ability to have 3 different modules on board, whether it's cargo, refining, or medical that we have so far, and who knows what else they'll add. People have suggested everything from more turrets to CICs to excavation designs for mining. mining support that can pull in the containers that is already on the refinery one, but people were like, no, no, we want ones that are designed just for more of that type of capacity, handling the bags and hanging them and huge amounts, and then compressing ore, not refining it. Uh, I've heard everything you can imagine about the ideas for the Galaxy, and at the end of the day, the base Galaxy sitting at 380 USD is a great ship. And I believe the modules, when you purchase them in game, are definitely worth it. It does open itself up to some questions on value when you get into the more difficult parts of this ship. You can only have one module at a time. You have to upfit the modules back at a spaceport that can support that, or a rather large location that can support that. And I do believe that CIG will kind of relent that smaller stations will be able to do it. But right now, they said basically, no, you can't. You have to go back to like a primary location, and that's gonna be a problem when you get to places like Pyro, which this ship would be perfect for if you can upfit it 1 minute for refining, next minute for cargo hauling, the next minute for medical when you're doing a bunker run, or in the future trying to take an outpost. I do see this ship as a very good utility ship, and for military applications or for org use in general. And I see its ease of use at a 7 because of such a small crew, and also the fact that most of its necessary things are already in game and other things. The refinery does kind of take a bit of a chunk away because you have to learn how to do that, and it really is kind of an acquired skill. And you might even damage the ship if it blows up inside there. Maneuverability is at a 7. I do believe that this ship has reasonable maneuverability, but it is a little large for its size. If you look at the thruster layout, it is pretty good. And it can get to its mission, which is the critical thing. It does have a Pisces or an Argo personnel on board, or an Argo cargo, that can move some things back and forth to the back of the ship. There is some nice symbiotic nature to that, to be able to allow it to do things separately from the primary ship without having to risk the whole ship in some cases. The value to me is at a 7. It is a little high once you factor in the modules, but its base price is hard to compete with. I myself have a 400i to Galaxy base CCU sitting waiting to be applied. When I see this ship, if I'm happy with it and the modules are viable in game, I will be applying that CCU as an exit ramp from the 400i. I see a 7 on the tech debt. Once again, the modules are what's dragging it down a little bit, and some of the promised services are kind of interesting to me and will certainly play a part in that score. I give it a 6 for combat logistics, mainly when it has its cargo mode or its medical in there. It does have a role, particularly the medical, allows it to fulfill a role with a reasonable turret layout, and it can defend itself better and handle more medical needs than, say, an Apollo, and it has a Pisces on board. Instead of relying on drones, it can rely on a Pisces or an Argo personnel to move people back into the fight. But at the end of the day, to me, it is not like a hot dropper. It is not a bigger mover of people like an Endeavor Hope class, for example, that has 2 Cuddy Reds on board, or at least a Cuddy Red on board, that can move people back and forth. This is not that kind of ship. That being said, I do see an interesting value to the C8R, combining in symbiotic nature with the Galaxy, especially for FPS and outpost type combat. Parking this thing a little bit further out, it'll be able to take quite a few hits as a large ship. Even I do kind of put it in the quasi-cap territory, and being able to move that C8R back and forth to the danger zone and ferry people to this thing, or throwing them in the back of an Ursa. It's a shame we don't have an Ursa Rescue Edition, but an Ursa, and then ripping across the battlefield back to this thing to fix them up, because regen will cost a lot more resources. People will not have their stuff. You will have to go recover the body anyway, so you might as well just bring them back with all their, while they're at a lower health repair needs than proper full regen, and all the negatives that go along with that, especially if we go into Death of a Spaceman. But still, having that ability right where you're fighting is great, and not having to risk a full-size capital to do it. And it's big enough where it won't get, the term squishy applies here. It's not that squishy like smaller vessels are, and it has enough medical supplies to keep it moving. Medical supplies will be required more and more. The larger the project is, the larger the work is, the more medical supplies will be required. So the mighty but small Apollo, or the Cuddy Red to a lesser extent on smaller damage, will be less useful than a Galaxy, and a Galaxy will be less useful than an Endeavour Hope class, because just the sheer amount of medical supplies and beds and such that you can put for the higher and higher level beds in these things will change based on the size of the ship. So, and also remember, being able to regen is one thing. Being able to upfit these people with helmets and at least an undersuit and a basic weapon, and then getting them into a vessel and getting them back into the fight or getting them back into a ground vehicle will matter. So having a hangar on board is nice, even if it's extra small hangar. The services on board, I put it in 8, especially when it has its medical on board or its refinery for different roles. I can definitely see this thing having a place in a lot of organization operations of many kinds.
890 Gatsby, 890 Gatsby, you're entering a combat zone. Get out of here. Get out of here. 890 Gatsby, you're entering a minefield.
In this future vision of combat, an 890 jump has no place on the battlefield. But after you hear this, you're probably going to lean back and go, well, it might have been there, especially if it was not so long into the future. And I'll explain why. I gave the 890 jump an offense of 5 and a defense of 7, mainly due to its PDSs and its extraordinarily large shields, which seem to be holding even into the future. However, its lack of really big teeth, I'll call them, running size 4 and size 3 guns on the turrets and remote turrets, tends to create a bigger problem for this ship. Basically, it's going to be outdated by the time that we get around to the bigger and bigger and bigger vessels. But it can lean back on its shields and its hangar to kind of help keep the status going in the right direction. You can fit a medium fighter inside that hangar. And honestly, one of the things you may want to consider is running 3, maybe even 4 Furies if you can fit them on the pad. The hangar is designed to kind of retract into the front delta point of this ship, and when you open it, it elevates the pad up. Many people currently, I don't know how true this is going to be in the future, just leave the pad up, and that allows you to fit more things without having to worry about door clearance and the elevator going up and down. But in the future, that may no longer be a trick you can do. It does also have a bunch of size 2 missiles, and they are what they are. It's nice to have extra weaponry, but I could definitely see this thing as having a rack of Furies as get-off-me systems. It does have regen on board to help defend the ship, so when you die, you can come back. In an emergency situation, it has a lot of interesting things. Let's just get right into it. I gave this as an 8 utility. It has a very interesting crew deck, which is truly the real org level of this ship. The spa and slash pool and all the small amount of habs it has up top, the VIP staterooms, and the bar and restaurant, literal bar and restaurant you're carrying around, and the org conference area, those are for show. But its crew deck is truly phenomenal because it has, from the front, you have your man turret access, top and bottom. You have a hangar in the same place. You have a bunch of habitations for the actual crew so they can easily log in and get to their posts. You have a area for food and drink. You have your medical, where you can select your regen locations and such right on the ship. And additionally, right behind that, if you follow the kind of winding corridors, you have a battle bridge. And in the same corridor behind the battle bridge, you have an armory. There is a rather large small arms armory on board. It's awkwardly in a hallway on both sides of a hallway, but there is a lot of storage for weaponry on that ship. And leading right from that armory is a overlook leading down into the elevator that can fit large vehicles. And you have an excellent defensive position from that upper part where the armory literally is, and you're regenerating behind there towards the center of the ship on the same level. All of this is all on the same level. And the engineering sub-air decks are off that level as well. So it presents like this interesting dynamic of, if you master that level, your organization or you and your friends can get used to running a cap ship from inside this quasi capital that is the 890 jump. And that's why I give the utility an 8. And into the future, I can see people still utilizing this ship until they get proper ships for this role or that role or that role, and still using it for those needs. And then you still have the RP aspects and the org meetup aspects, the negotiation ship, so to speak, and everything else that you can build it out into, and just for fun type of ship that it is. And also, of course, VIP content. So I see this ship as an interesting vessel. I gave it a 7 for ease of use because there is still a learning curve. There is some things that are going to need to be added for it to truly see its full vision. It will get a pass. But I do think that the ship is pretty good. I think actually the NPC bartenders and such are going to be one of your bigger things on this ship to figure out if the VIP missions demand that type of thing. For the record, I think the VIP missions are going to scale with the size of the vessel, and the demands on you to keep those NPCs entertained are going to become bigger and bigger. And if there's ever players involved, of course, they're going to demand a lot. 7 for maneuverability. It has very powerful engines that are not very efficient, but they do the job. And it has a full-size hangar, as I mentioned before, and a ground vehicle storage area that's very large and very reasonable for the size of the ship. So you certainly can get a lot of equipment into place for different missions and get people on and off the ship very reliably. Hence, a 7 in combat logistics, jumping ahead a little bit. But let's set the tone. You have a 5 for value. This ship is very expensive, sitting just below the 1K price point for included LTI, which is a major thorn in a lot of people's sides. It is often a limited ship. They kind of dance around making it not limited, etc. So it frustrates a lot of people that you, in some cases, cannot get LTI on this vessel. Hopefully in the future, it just jumps up slightly more and it bypasses that issue by hitting the 1K price point and give it LTI. Personally, I think that they should just make it 1K and then just include a runabout and a Lynx rover with it, and then all of a sudden, everything's kind of looking the right way. I just feel like this ship kind of belongs there already and just rip the Band-Aid off, but it is what it is. That's my opinion. The tech debt, I give it 8. Basically, we're just waiting on PDSs and things like that, which most ships are, and it's already in game, as I mentioned, but it will get a pass, so if there's anything new, there you go. As I mentioned, its combat logistics is at a 7 because of all the reasons I've already detailed, and its services are at a 9. Once again, it has regen, and it's a rather small medical facility, but it is an entire medical facility with regen, with a tier 2 bed, and it enjoys a lot of unique atmospheric services that no other ship can offer. So, yeah, I would say that this is a really good ship, and it will keep your crew going, and I don't think you're going to have a lot of trouble getting a couple people that are interested in joining up, playing on an 890 jump for a little bit, and kind of going on different missions. I do think it's going to cost an arm and a leg to fuel this thing. I do think it's going to hurt when this thing gets damaged. It has very unique plating, and it is going to be a nightmare to get insurance claims on this thing as an ultra luxury quasi capital. But for what it is, it truly does a lot of jobs, and it does them quite effectively, believe it or not. So I can't really give it points that are, not there, and I can't take away things it doesn't deserve. It does a lot of jobs, and it will serve you well, but it'll just be a very expensive method to do it. And of course, if you're not into Origin ships, I get that, but this isn't a style discussion. This is all the different categories I'm trying to honor on this for all ships. I'm trying to judge them all fairly.
All right, we're starting to get flack with the locals. Everybody, ceasefire, ceasefire. Pull those mines back, Nautilus. I gotta commend y'all for doing a great job. We took the Perseus. We held the outpost. There is a ceasefire in effect. A neutral Genesis Starliner will be flying through here very soon. It's going interspace. So do keep that in mind, that it is not meant to be part of this. We are not pulling...
into one of the major wild cards in the quasi-cap series, and that is the Starliner, a ship that is going to grow to a quasi-capital size, and has a lot of modularity that still needs to be decided upon and figured out. This is a ship that has been reconcepted so many times. I think even CIG lost count of all the different designs. And there are videos as early as a decade ago that show different concepts and ideas for the Starliner. Don't quote me on exactly a decade, but it's been a lot of years. And one of the reasons I gave it a 4 on offense and defense, which a lot like a lot of quasi caps, it's rather evened out for its scale and size on its offense and defense. And one of the reasons is because it has limited turrets. It only has 2, and they're not that large. So basically, in its current capacity on its most recent design, we're hearing that it's most likely going to be size 4 pairs of 2 size 4s on one turret, and possibly a second turret that also has size 4s. Now, if this thing does not have at least 2 or even 3 PDSs, I would be floored. It should absolutely have those as a defensive measure to protect it, and that's why I give it a 4 on defense. Plain and simple, to put it up to par, even with the Liberator on its defensive measures, it needs those things, especially with how many people it's going to have on board. Some descriptions have reached the concept of having 40 or even 50 players on board this ship. That's not a combat vessel, but it has 7 in utility. Why? Because this ship is designed to be either half passengers and half cargo, or all cargo, or half passengers that are full first class or business class, etc., and then a traditional area for a coach class passengers, or even more unique in the weeds, where the entire ship could be a kind of first class or business class type concept where it's all VIP transportation. All sorts of different ideas. Ideas have been thrown around to put a casino on this ship, bars on this ship, all sorts of things. This is the ship of dreams. And if even half of those are realized, this ship is going to have an immense amount of utility, even just accidentally, because of that cargo area. Additionally, not knowing how this ship is outlaid helps it move cargo or passengers, because pirates don't know how valuable it is without scanning it down. I give its easy use a 9 because in most configurations that are not military, more on that in a minute, are very, very straightforward. This ship has limited systems. And aside from a mixmaster, you really not have a lot of niche things that are only to this ship that you have to worry about. You load people on it, you fly to another location to complete your contract, you deliver them. And both NPCs and eventually players will be running these things and flying the friendly and not so friendly skies with a Genesis Starliner. I do not predict a lot of these will be running around Pyro, but unless they're player run. But it is a very interesting ship. At 400 USD, I still see it as an immense value because it will grow and there will be a lot of different versatility with the ship. And for its tech debt, I have a 6 with an asterisk because there is a lot of unknowns with this ship. One of the biggest issues is right next door, combat logistics, which also I gave it a score of 6, because there was originally a vision to have a CIC style military Genesis Starliner support that had military seats that could stow weapons properly, and even have some small vehicles like Cyclones fit inside of it. All of those things into this one ship. And if that's the case, it will be very useful for combat logistics. Even just a civilian version of this ship, once the fight is over, will be very useful at pulling entire groups of people back to civilization when you don't have enough habs to control every single place. You don't have enough habs for every single person. So bringing a couple Starliners in will suddenly become a very valuable thing. Valkyries could also be used in that role, but Starliners are going to be extremely good in Atmo. They're going to be very fuel efficient and very practical for scale. And also, don't forget, they have a lot of cargo space, which the Valk cannot really boast it has, depending on configuration of the Starliner. Services are at a 4 because they're very limited. Drinks and food and such are great, but there's not medical. There isn't some of the more advanced services that you would expect on a quasi-capital when you start getting into this range, like a proper armory and such, although the military one may surprise us. Who knows if it's been reconcepted yet again for something that useful. So I would give it a pretty strong recommendation, as long as you, once again, understand you know what you're getting into. This is not going to be a fighting ship. This is meant to kind of be on the periphery, on the outskirts, waiting for the fight to hopefully go in your direction, and then shuttle everybody back before they log out for the night. Or it'll be bringing people quietly closer to the front, and then some other ship they're hopping into to support the fight or get into the fight. It is not really meant to be on the front lines. Now, even a military Starliner, to me, unless the thing can prove it has a lot more armor, a lot more shields, bristling with PDSs, I just don't see it. Although maybe CIG will prove me wrong. I mean, there have been ships in the past that have really impressed me and really stood out. But at this moment, these are the scores I'm offering for the near future vision of this idea. So you can see its score suffered a little bit, but it's still a solid vessel. I would also mention these are going to be a dime a dozen in the world. You are going to see tons of these, especially with NPCs flying between spaceports within a system and then also system to system, where players and NPCs will be hopping on board these things to get to other places without having to do anything other than just sit in a seat. So do bear in mind that these will be heavily defended by NPCs as well when you're flying under their banner, because otherwise, how in the world would they be able to control these systems and properly run them if they're constantly being blown out of the sky by pirates? So there may be some intangibles of running under the Starliner banner. Additionally, players that are pirate hunters might focus down people who start killing Starliners for the same reasons, that they're kind of like anti-society. This thing is not an offensive weapon system in most cases, so it's seen as a much more bad act to take one of these down than a combat vessel. So yeah, just some thoughts in the back of my mind. We'll see how that kind of turns out. That'll do it for this part one. Please let me know in the comments what you think. I am still actively developing the capital section. Like always, I always read them at the very least. I usually comment on them and do appreciate the feedback, good, bad, negative, otherwise. And I leave it up to many people's surprise. Additionally, I'm available on Discord as always if you want to reach out privately. And yeah, I hope you really appreciated this content. This took me a lot of time to put together off and on, and it's taken my mind off some things. Thank you very much and have a great night.